Good morning. Thank you for coming. I'm Deidre Anderson, and I'm the Executive Director at United Intercity Services, which is the home of St. Mark Child and Family Development Center, where you're gathered today. With me, I have one of our young people. We are a high-quality early childhood program. We serve young children 6 weeks to 5 years of age. We are directly impacted by violence, unfortunately, every day. We currently have one child whose both of her parents were murdered. We have another whose father was killed and involved in a crime, another whose father was killed in a motorcycle accident. Trauma and violence impact all of us. This young man that's standing with me today represents our future. When we invest at a young age, we can make a difference. I was honored when I was asked to be a part of the task force. I must admit it was a little frustrating experience as well, because we all had day-to-day experiences of hearing about violence every day. And my question was, what could I do? What difference could I make? Well, I'm here to say today that it's all about us as individuals. It's not about a task force. It's not about high policy recommendations. It's about how we roll up our sleeves and we work with young people like Eric and families that are impacted. Thank you.
We as a community have to come forward. We have to be honest about the issue. We have to be honest about what it's going to take to deal with the issues. Gun violence is a part of violence, but oftentimes there are other indicators prior to the gun violence being a part, whether it's substance abuse, mental health issues, anger issues, or just disorder. We have to deal with people. And as we continue to see people make poor choices in our community, we can no longer stand by and say, woe is them, because it's really woe is us. And for us to really be a caring Kansas City, we all have to be part of the solution. And so the recommendations you'll hear today will set forth some long-term solutions to be able to deal with some of the long-standing issues that have plagued our community. And I'm thankful to be a part of it.
We spent 12 public meetings listening to community members, agencies, law enforcement groups. We listened to members of the public, neighborhood associations. We heard what is happening on a day-to-day basis. We got a handle on everything that's already occurring in the community. And one of the things that I think we reached a consensus on pretty quickly is that Kansas City has all the tools right now to address these issues. We have all the tools that we need. What we need to do right now is start having community-based conversations about how we leverage those tools. And so one of the things that we quickly came to a consensus on is that we need to put forth not only short-term strategies to help bring all of those resources together, but long-term strategies and policy solutions so that we can continue to look at this issue in a way that takes into account facts and data and puts together all of the good work that's already occurring in the community. So we came up with some recommendations that were both community-based, policy-based, and then also a public engagement and education piece. I want to address the policy solutions first. As you know, violence is a long-term community problem, and solutions will take a long-term planning and strategy that will include policy changes. And so we have requested that the mayor and the city council follow up on the following long-term policy solutions. Number one, we want the city to fund, develop, and implement a comprehensive youth master plan. This is something that has been championed by our health department and is something that we need to move forward so we can start to coordinate all of our resources that affect the youth in our community. Number two, we want to pursue a federal study through the CDC or the NIH or whomever of our federal partners would be willing to look at the recent increase in homicides in Kansas City. The city of Wilmington, Delaware was able to get this to work, and I know that we have had some success talking with our federal delegation about the need for this in Kansas City. One thing that we learned as we gathered data through this violence task force is that right now, nationwide, violent crime is actually at a low. We have seen in the last couple of years an uptick in violent homicides and violent crimes in Kansas City, and we would like help from statisticians in Washington, D.C. to help us figure out why we've seen that uptick over the last couple of years and what is happening on a national level that we can use to help put together a strategy locally. And then finally, we would like to pursue legislation to create an interagency domestic violence fatality review for our state. Right now, every time there is a child homicide in the state of Missouri, a fatality review team comes together to look at all of the issues to figure out how we can prevent the next child homicide. We need to do that for domestic violence cases as well. We do that informally here in the Kansas City Metro already, but if this were a required practice, we would be able to get better participation from law enforcement and other agencies, and we would be able to take this metro-wide to organizations and jurisdictions that are not currently doing that. Community-based solutions, this is really where the rubber hits the road. We need to make sure that these solutions that we are proposing today come from within the community, and some of the things that City Hall can do to help with that are, number one, create a full-time staff position to coordinate all of the efforts that are taking place right now. We need to look at this in a comprehensive and holistic way, the way that we have done other issues in our city, and it is time for us to do that when it comes to violence prevention. We would also like to see a Storefront Community Resource Center start to pop up throughout our city. One of the things that we heard from folks, when we heard from the police department, for instance, is that even in areas where our highest crime exists, that there are pockets of peacefulness and pockets of safety in our resilient neighborhoods when you have strong neighborhood associations, when you have strong places for people to go to have resources, when you have neighborhood watch groups. And so we want to make sure that we have those resource centers throughout the community so that people have a place to go to address all of the issues that lead to violent crime. And then finally, we would like to establish an electronic database for all community resources. It's interesting when you start to talk to all of the agencies in the community who are working on the ground on all of the issues that our community faces, that one thing people say is missing is the ability to just get onto a computer or an app on your phone and type in, "I need this source right now." We have several great organizations that have data. We've got 211, obviously, with United Way. We've got several organizations that provide these services in niche areas, whether it be homelessness prevention or food insecurity. One of the things we need to do is coordinate all those efforts in an electronic way. And finally, we need to look at public engagement and education. We learned throughout all of these presentations that a lot of folks feel like this violence that plagues our communities is part of a larger culture of violence. And one of the ways that we can address this is through a public education campaign that we have used similarly in other public health issues. Let's think back to drunk driving. Let's think back to tobacco cessation. We need to be talking about violence in our community as a public health issue, and we need to address that through public engagement and a public service campaign. So one of the recommendations that we've made is that we need to create a full service campaign, public service campaign, to address the culture of violence, and we want to make sure that that is driven from within the community with the resources of the city to back it so that we can make sure we are getting the right messages out. And then finally, we want to establish a robust public engagement and mentoring program with Kansas City civic and business leaders. I think that all of us have found that adverse childhood events are a huge indicator in what's going to happen to a child when they become an adult, whether they will be a victim or survivor of crime or whether they will be a perpetrator of crime. And one of the things we must do is focus our amazing leadership that we have in this community on making sure that we have a mentorship and public engagement program to keep that moving forward. Those are the essence of our recommendations. For next steps, we are asking the mayor for his support in helping to implement those, and then you will be hearing from Councilwoman Kennedy and I on our roles on City Council so that we can continue to push these issues forward. It was very important that this task force, that we not just create recommendations that sit on a shelf, that we start to move forward with implementation of those recommendations. And obviously, this is not going to be a project that just sits. We are going to add to it. We are going to increase our recommendations as we move forward. And I really want the takeaway to be that we have all the tools and people in this community to get this done. And now we just need to sit down and make sure that this is a priority for our community.
So Councilwoman Justice described some things that I believe are critical to the issue of combating the violence in our city, and we have to recognize that there are good people across the city trying to do good things, but all too often it takes place in silos where people aren't talking to each other, where there's not coordination, where there's not a collaborative effort. One thing that I think that we've learned, and one thing that I think is worth repeating, we've had some very good things happen in the city in the last 6 or 7 years. Every one of those things has come about because of people collaborating and working together. If we want this issue to change, just like we've wanted the landscape to change, the attitude to change, the outlook to change, the perception of the city to change, then we have to apply the same formula. It has to be collaborative. It has to be something that everybody is willing to dig into. It has to be something that everybody is welcome to the table. The process that Councilwoman Justice and Councilwoman Kennedy employed brought people to the table and allowed them to have a voice, and out of that came the recommendations. The recommendations are worthless unless there is action. And that's what I'll be looking for, is action. So we'll need people in the community getting up and getting behind this and doing something, rolling up their sleeves. They serve as a next step in our effort to fully bring the community to the table and address this issue. I think those next steps are absolutely necessary, and that's why in this budget, we've already allocated the money to hire someone to coordinate these efforts as the task force has recommended, a full-time employee who will work with all the disparate parts in order to create a seamless approach to this in a way that we've never had before. We need somebody at the ground level coordinating all the disparate groups, all the disparate efforts, leveraging those together so that we maximize the return on those investments and the resources that are already in place and that will be brought to bear in order to enhance the effort. We need someone who will continue to help us build trust and accountability within the neighborhoods, because at the end of the day, without that trust and accountability, without the willingness of people in the neighborhoods and the community to work with the police, to work with the government, to work with each other, which is absolutely crucial, then we're not going to succeed. We need to get over all of this racial stuff, and we need to have black and white, purple and green, male and female, straight and gay, young and old, rich and poor, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Catholics, whatever the case, willing to understand that every time someone dies as a result of the violence in this community, we are all diminished. Every time we have a kid who is affected by the loss of a parent through violence, we are all diminished. And every time that we have incidents that occurred, like the one that Councilwoman Kennedy was involved in, we are all diminished. We will not change that until we are all engaged. So in addition to the full-time employee recommendations put forward, there was a set of tools that Councilwoman Justice said are already in place. But it's like having tools in 15 different garages. We have people who want to build things, but they have to go from one garage to the other garage to get a wrench and a hammer and a screwdriver and a nail, when all of that stuff should be there at their fingertips, and everybody who wants to build something should be working together. I cannot and will not stop emphasizing the absolute need for the people of this city and this community to stand up together and say, that's it, we've had enough. And we're going to start working together to put an end to some of this nonsense. So bringing more people into the mix is part of the recommendations, and that's what we're going to do. Councilwoman Kennedy said a lot that we must recognize that crime and violence affects us all. We definitely recognize that. And if we bolster neighborhood groups, if we bring about issues of leadership, the issues in neighborhoods will be much better addressed when we have strong neighborhood groups, strong neighborhood leaders in every single neighborhood across the city. We need to develop digital tools so that people can communicate effectively, easily, and quickly, and that information that is available to help them solve problems is at their fingertips, not 6 miles away. And if we put boots on the ground and coordinate the efforts of people and groups working together to eradicate violence, we will see results. Until we have that effort, we will not see results, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. This problem has been around for decades and decades. It's going to take hard work to solve it and to change it. And if people want to really solve it and change it, we have now created what we believe is a good first step of blueprints and recommendations to get that done. Again, won't matter a whit if you don't get engaged and help.